Mr. Payne, 34HC. First license in '93, age 47 as a novice, struggled to learn code, but nightly practice and prodding from Elvis, passed the 20 exam, became extra. Found his niche and contested in DXing. So, you know, world class, we got you. And then Dr. Eshleman here, W4DR. Began amateur radio at age 14 in 1950, so y'all can do the math, figure that one out. So on the first, is it Navassa? Is that correct? So I can't pronounce things very well. The DX position is KC4AB. 1967, I guess, operated at Rio de Oro. 69, so I was born in 68. That's awesome. You got me on both sides. 67, 69. Member of the Navassa DX position again. So we got a lot of history here. We've got people, and then we've got my good friend George, who KJ4IPF. Unless you changed it. All right, so he's still got his original call. So at least a couple members here, and of course. Lovely Mrs. Eshleman, who's also a member, correct? Is that correct? Of CVCC? Is that correct?
A member of what?
CVCC?
Yes, yes.
Yep. Anybody else members of CVCC? Raise your hand. Dr.
Nancy
Jeff?
is too.
And Nancy as well. So, quite the formidable opponents here, folks. Fortunately, it's a cooperative competition, if you want to take it that way. I was given a link for a URL to a YouTube video. Would you all prefer me to play that first? Start that off?
Video first.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So let's go to the video first.
All right, we'll do the video first, and
and then I'll speak.
Okay, so we'll hopefully this will work. Give it a shot.
Booking Europe. My name is Matt. Maria, Alexei, Tatiana. Matt is my name. Kyoto.
My first contact with ham radio was when I was a kid, and I was driving my bicycle around the neighborhood.
So I would ride down the street on a bicycle and see a ham's antenna.
And there was a guy with a tower in his backyard. I thought, that's interesting.
Go knock on somebody's door.
I knocked on his door and said, hey, what's this? And he said, come on back and I'll show you.
Is that a ham radio antenna? I'm interested in it. And they would take you in and show you what was going on.
His name was Ed Pastow. He was K4CI. He put the set of headphones on my head, and all of a sudden I heard a guy on a ship out in the ocean off of South Africa. And he keyed up the mic and talked to the guy, and the guy responded. That was my introduction. I thought, this is really interesting.
My first contact was made with this and that, and a very simple wire antenna. I was so thrilled when I made a contact all the way to the West Coast with that central station. That was almost a thrill like getting Mongolia years later on 160 meters.
You're trying to get people on the other side of the earth, of the world. You're trying to perhaps rack up a number of countries that you haven't talked to people before.
This card right here is from Mongolia, and that represents one of the most unique contacts I ever made, because Mongolia is directly on the other side of the globe.
And the King of Spain is a ham radio operator, and I have worked him.
I got a call, a real strong signal. Went back and I said, I'm sorry I didn't get your whole call. I said, that is my whole call. It was J1 Alpha. And he was the king of, as we all know, King Hussein. And that was a really exciting moment.
When rare stations would come on the air, everybody tries to contact them.
And then there's some people that actually are not on the air because nobody has gone out there.
And a lot of people go to rare and exciting places to experience the thrill of being the hunted rather than the hunter. That's what we call it the expedition. We decided we wanted to go on one of these trips. And then it was announced that this little possession of the U.S. called Navassa Island was qualified as a separate entity or country. That paved the way a little bit, and Don managed to get the Coast Guard permission and the FCC license, but then we still needed a way to get there. So we looked in our call book and we could see that there was a radio club in Santiago, Cuba, which was the closest major port to Navassa. I wrote to the president of this radio club. I sent him a letter, told him what we wanted to do, and to my amazement, the guy wrote back and he said, "I have found this boat for you. It's a yacht that belongs to the president of the Bacardi Rum Company. I'm his next door neighbor." Just an incredible piece of luck came up, presto. Any other way, we'd never gotten there. So we actually then really did a coup. We were the first people to operate from this island. People managed to hear us, and we were 3 penniless teenagers that did it. Nothing like that's ever happened.
Hello, Mike 4, Whiskey Air Alpha.
I got my license in 2008, and I had a friend who told me about another guy who had 7 towers at his house. And I thought, okay, it's 6 too many, right? And so I went out to meet him, and he introduced me to the contesting part of ham radio, which I never heard of.
So if you get in what's called a DX contest, it's just a weekend, there's a whole lot of stations from all over the world participate in that. And so you can accumulate a lot of countries just by being on that one weekend.
You're going to have a greater chance of finding somebody on the other side of the world in a contest. Because everybody's going to be on the air trying to talk to everybody else.
Again, you're not competing against someone else. You're really competing within yourself to get to a certain level in the hobby. Once you get to that point, then your job is to share that. What I try to do is to really get these guys interested in coming here for a contest, as an example. I also open the band up if a guy wants to work a certain country that's hard to work, and he doesn't have let's say doesn't have an antenna that's quite good enough to work the guy in Hong Kong, and he wants to work it. I open the station up for those guys so that they can use my station to enhance their situations.
The camaraderie of the ham radio community, which is, come on in, let's just try to show off this hobby to others and welcome other people in. In contesting, you're trying to get as many points as possible, and you can't work a 48-hour shift by yourself usually. So you'll have your friends come in and split it up and take shifts. And it was because of the graciousness of Jonathan and Nancy that I've come back, and he just says, "Come on back, we'll work this contest this year, this part of the year." And that's part of ham radio is people getting to know each other that way.
Maybe a part of the incentive is waffles in the morning.
AC, I'm guessing mid-50s, and it's cloudy, overcast.
I enjoy talking to people in different parts of the world and making fun. I've got friends that live in Japan that I talk to on a pretty regular basis. You build just friendships. We don't see each other every day or every week, but we talk on the air occasionally, and the club meetings are a bit of camaraderie. It's just a kind of social thing. Just a bridge match or a chess match happens to focus on radio. The big thing is the people.
You're invited somewhere the first time, to a group meeting based on your interest, and then fine. But the reason you're here the second and third time is because people are nice enough to have you back and share their investment in the hobby with others.
Recently, we had a visitor who was touring the world, a retired guy from Western Australia. And he had been in contact with a close friend of mine in our club. So because of their friendship on the radio, John said, "Will you come over here and visit Richmond on your tour of the States, and I'll see that you see the right things and meet like-minded amateurs." And it turned out I had contacted this guy years ago, and he came over. He must have a good record system with card. We had exchanged one of my signed cards that I had sent him and actually visited here. We just had a great time. Later on, he said on email that he said, well, he had been to a lot of cities and where the local amateurs hosted him, but we did the best in Richmond on our hospitality. So I was kind of proud of that.
Jonathan talks in the evenings on a group, somebody in New Hampshire, somebody in New York, North Carolina, Tennessee, and they all chat around. And once in a while I'll get on and say, hi Bob, tell Carol hi, and Carol will say, hi Nancy, in the background. I think they've come up here twice, we visited. In fact, they were up here in August, and there were about 5 of them. Some of us met for the first time. Jonathan's been down to Tennessee. You find out about each other, and you really make friendships.
By and large, it's one of the most welcoming communities that I've ever experienced.
All right, so how's that for an intro? Okay. So any questions before we start? No? All right, with that, Dr. Eshleman.
Good evening. I learned some things this evening. One is that if you're over 80 and you join this club, you don't have to pay dues. I thought about that. I used to be a member of this club, by the way, and I think it was 1972, I was actually president for a year. And then I thought of another thing. I thought there was a parallel between me and George H.W. Bush. I think we're probably both the oldest living ex-presidents. I'll have to check on that. If there's anybody that's has been president of this club before 72, will you stand up now, or I'm going to claim this distinction. I don't see anybody here. Well, as it's been inferred, I have won a lot of awards in the DX world, and I like to kind of compare myself to, I'm hearing myself too well, to Kyle Ripken. Kyle Ripken was probably above average player, but he gained his distinction by just doing it for a long time, and that's what I did. I've been a DXer for 67 years, and most of you, unless you started real young, aren't going to do it that long. So a lot of what I did, I just got there because I stayed at it so long and stayed interested in it so long. And what I would like to do tonight is to stimulate your interest to dip your toes in the water and do a little DXing. Now, I think at heart, every one of you is a DXer. You may not realize it. And I'm sure that in this group, and I don't know very many of you, there's people whose only radio equipment perhaps is a 2-meter FM, maybe in their car or handy talkie. Well, what is DX? DX is distance. And in the early days of radio, it was like maybe 100 miles. If with spark gap, that was a real distant contact. And then it came more and more to be, 200 miles, 300, 400. And then finally they began to make, after they discovered that the radio frequencies above 200 meters were useful, contacts began to be made almost on a worldwide basis with the vacuum tube and more sophisticated stuff that kept coming online, mainly developed by radio amateurs. And so in 1937 they said, we need a way to manage accomplishments so that people have a yardstick. And a guy named Clinton B. DeSoto came up with the idea of the DX Century Club. And that would be contacting 100 different countries. And they made up a list. It was a pre-war list, 37. And years later, in 2001, the league, in honor of that, decided that they would have a Clinton B. DeSoto cup, and it would be awarded to the amateur that had the most banned countries, and that is the aggregate total, how many countries you worked on, 160, 80, 40, 30, 17, 15, 12, and 10, and they included 6 meters. And at that point, they were already tracking that, and they had individual DXCCs for each of those 9 bands. And if you looked at those pictures, they were kind of going back and forth between my place and Jonathan's, and a lot of the pictures that were of my awards, they were actually had Jonathan's shack or Jonathan's verbiage, so you couldn't tell which was which a lot of times unless you already knew. But at any rate, I was fortunate to get that first Clinton B. DeSoto Cup, and you probably saw a picture of this big cup at one of the stations. There is only been 3 of those issued, but I don't think there'll ever be another one issued to the U.S. because 6 meters is so workable in Europe, and people just, the top countries total in Europe now on 6 meters is like 250 countries out of a possible 339. So people are working the world on 6, even with low sunspots from Europe and North Africa. But that's not the point of it. Back to the thing of, even if you are only a repeater operator, I bet you've parked on the Skyline Drive and tried to see how many repeaters you could hit from some high point, or how far you could walk and still get to the local repeater. Well, that's a form of DX. But if you have a transceiver, and you may say, you know, I live in a restricted neighborhood, I can't possibly do anything. You know, and Joe talked about that a little. Things are going to loosen up, and I predict that these bad HOA rules are going to get knocked a little in the head. Already our state is one of the most liberal in the union to allow amateur structures where HOAs don't rule. If you don't have a restrictive covenant on your property, you can put up a 75-foot tower in the city somewhere, or a 200-foot one in the country, where I live. Anyhow, I think that's going to be less of a factor. But even if you're in one of the strict places, I have friends that have clandestine antennas, wires. It's very hard for these people to see wires. And unless you have a real sharp, aggressive lawyer as a next-door neighbor that's litigious, you probably can get by with stringing a wire between a couple of trees. I recently made friends with an amateur in Germany, and he obviously must be a fairly wealthy guy, because we wanted to exchange cards. He said, "You don't need to send me any money. I just send the cards out." Well, that shows in itself that he's not impoverished, but he's in a restricted place. So all he has is a little short vertical on the deck of his condominium, which is kind of hidden, and he has 20 watts. And I had nice contact with him on JT65, 60 meters, and got his card. Well, you don't exchange much information and that sort of thing, but what's fun to do when you get a station like that is look them up on QRZ.com, and you find out so much about, you feel like you know this guy, because a lot of them put their pictures on there, descriptions of their stations, and all of a sudden you have a wealth of information just going to QRZ.com. Now, once you get hooked on this, the world is your enchilada, because you're starting out, every country you work is a new country. But after a while, you will get to the point where, well, you know, I've worked a bunch of G's in England and a bunch of DLs and the Common, and I'm starting to be interested in trying to find out how to work Luxembourg, or some missing country where you've got most of Europe. Well, I use DX Summit. That again is a free site you get on your computer, and you can, if you're interested or only work one band, You can program it to just show spots for that band. And so right on your computer there are all the, you'll see the countries, and you say, I know there's a station in the United Arab Emirates. I wonder when he operates. So you type his call in and press a button, and it'll show all the times that he's showing up. And so you can start to stalk or prey a little. But that's at the second level. Put up a little simple antenna and choose a mode that you like. Now I know, and I wasn't opposed to this. I knew CW and learned it in 3 months when I was 14. But I think maybe when you're 50 or 60, learning the code is not quite as easy. And so I anticipate that many of you won't want to take that step, but if you do, it's really good, because CW is still probably the best mode for DXing it with a simple station and with reasonable speed. But sideband is very popular, but power is a little more important there, and antennas. So it's the mode that's probably the most popular, but also the one that is requires a little more. Now I'm just about 50% deaf. And so the newest thing for me are the digital modes, because heck, you don't even need to hear if you have a digital mode. So I'm into JT65 with the help of my friend Bruce, WD4LBR. And so I can sit in front of the screen, and here's this 1 kilohertz wide band, or maybe it's 2 kilohertz, one of the assigned frequencies on 60 meters. And you can observe the spectrum, and you see all the contacts going on. Somebody's calling CQ here, here's a conversation going on, here's another conversation. Not uncommon in that 2 kilohertz space to see 6 different contacts going on, and one guy's calling CQ. So you punch your button on him, your transmitter goes to that exact frequency, and if he answers you, you get a nice red markup with your call and his call that he's answered you, and exchange reports and 73s. Then you go look him up on QRZ and find out what you really want to know. One of the exciting contacts I made recently was with a guy in the United Arab Emirates. He runs 15 watts, and this is on 5 megahertz. And when I went to QRZ, there's a picture of his place. He's an airline, he trains simulator, he trains airline pilots, and he looks to be a Brit, I think that's where he's from. He's not a native Arab. And he's got all these pictures. His hobby is flying helicopters, and he's got a thing that he rides out in the desert on. So I learned all about this guy, exchanged a couple of emails with him, and just got his card the other day. Those are exciting sort of things, but imagine 15 watts from almost the other side of the world. This is great sport. So JT65 is something, and you people that are computer savvy, it's real easy to get into these things. The other thing I do is I subscribe to the Daily DX. That's something that W3UR, he puts out a DX bulletin and news on the internet 7 days a week, about probably 300 days out of 365. He does take a few holidays and family vacations, but Bernie puts it, and so you can tell all the expeditions, all the news, and keep up on it just with a click of the button that comes to you every day. And he makes his living that way, so I think he charges, I don't know, something like $39, $40 for a year subscription. But with a minimum amount of time, you can know exactly what's happening in the DX world and know when something's going to come on. You saw the stuff about the Navassa Island. We went to Navassa, the 3 of us, and we spent $900 doing it. This last group that you saw some pictures went there, and they spent $250,000 to pull that off. Now, the interesting thing was that they made about 140,000 contacts, and they spent $250,000. So all the contacts were costing about $2 a piece. Well, we made 1,300 contacts. That doesn't sound like very many, but we really worked in 1954, most of the avid DXers in the world. We worked the big names. There weren't so many of us then. Anyhow, our contacts cost 82 cents a piece, if you figured it out. But I got to thinking about, well, that was a real bargain. Well, it wasn't really, because if you compare 1954 dollars to 2017 dollars, there's a factor of 8. And so our 82 cent contacts actually cost about $4 a piece in today's money. But at any rate, it was a remarkable thing and something I wouldn't take anything for. DX has really enriched our family. Rosalie and I have traveled to in our younger days, a good many foreign countries. And in many of them, we had amateur friends. And they hosted us, took us to dinner, took us on tours, all this because of this friendship that had been developed on the air. We celebrated our 25th anniversary by going to a semi-rare country, the Turks and Caicos Islands. The island we went to was Providenciales, and we had a nice cabin there for 9 days, I think, or it was at least a full week. And we put up a little antenna, and we'd be on the air a couple hours every day, both of us. And we just, had a ball for our 25th anniversary. So operating overseas has been a great thing, and you get the idea that, just as the tape said, it's fun to be the hunter rather than the hunter. So that's DX. I encourage you to, at whatever level you have, use what you have. Take advantage of some of the things that are on the computer. And if you want to get on CW and you don't even know CW, there are code readers. I've never used one. I don't think they work at quite the level where you have it in your head. But I do know some amateurs that are working CW that way. One very good friend, she started as a CB'er and worked her way all the way up to extra, but then she got to be such an enthusiastic DXer, she started using a reader, and next thing she knew CW. And although she's probably not a whiz on it, she can work the rare ones, and she's only 2 countries from the honor roll. I have another friend who's moved to North Carolina now. He lived in a restricted neighborhood near me, and all he had was a wire antenna between a couple of trees in the backyard, no amplifier, and he's worked well over 300 countries. Now that happened over a period of time. So, just get your feet wet, try working a few DX stations. You may find that it's fascinating. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Got to come back up.
Well, you can ask questions, but I probably can't hear them.
Well, that's all right. So how do you help, like, the intimidation factor of somebody who's brand new, who gets on and it's fast? These people are talking fast and they're spitting out these numbers. How do you help people overcome that? I mean, does that sound familiar? Has anybody heard that on the radio? Right? I mean, it's just flying, and you're just scared to answer. I mean, right? Does that happen?
Yeah. I just walk away from it. How to answer that, but
now I'm sure you're not intimidated.
Just listen for a little while, and you'll catch on to what the tempo. And as someone said on JT65, it isn't fast.
Oh, that's slow.
It's like watching paint dry or grass grow. It's very slow. It may be too slow for you. But this is my newest thing since I'm almost deaf. I love it. That's where I spend most of my time. But I still like to catch a CW once. Yeah, some of it is high speed. That's true. But once you learn to recognize your own call, you throw your call in there and you try to figure out where the guy's listening if it's a split frequency. And you'll be able to tell when he answers. You can just give a report. And English language, the universal language of the airwaves is English. Most of the people that work DX knows rudimentary English. So you don't need to worry that you don't know French or German or Spanish, which are about the other three things. But
Okay. Any questions from the audience here? Come on, be bold.
I would like to hear from one of these gentlemen about split.
So he'd like to hear about split operations. How does that work?
yeah, well, most de-expeditions do split because if they allowed the calls on their own frequency.
So hold on, what is split?
What is split? Okay. Split is where where the DX station transmits on one frequency and listens on another frequency. Most transceivers now that you buy are capable of splitting the two frequencies. Typically, a DX station, and it's used more by DXpeditions than it is by home-growing people that are on the air a lot because they aren't as rare, will do split, and because they just can't allow, and they, depending on how rare they are, they may split, say, 5 to 10 up. Typically, they listen above, but not always. They may say up 5, up 10, or they may say up 5 to 20 is common. And you'll hear the direction on voice. On CW, they'll again say up, probably just U or UP. And if you have DX Summit or one of the, there's other programs by the way, you will see people listing spots and they will say, oh, I got him on 14,256, and you know he's tuning maybe 30 kilohertz. That's useful information because it's like a needle in a haystack. So that can help you to know which part of his range, and then you get faster and you'll be able to quickly span up there and find the guy that's saying 5'9" Virginia or whatever the report is. And then maybe you discover that he's not answering 2 stations in a row, but he's moving up just a fraction after each contact. And you discover the pattern, and you say move up a half a kilohertz and put your call in. Or you'll stay and do 2 or 3 on that one, and then too many people discover it, and so his range, the bigger, the rarer the station, usually the larger range of tuning. But a lot of this you can get from the internet. But split is very important for expeditions. And a common mistake, and I still make it sometimes, I get all set up for the split and forget to push the button that says split. And so guess what? Somebody comes on, DR up! You know, so you get an angry response and you just kind of say, you know, you blush and have egg on your face, but you don't do it, and you stop. That'll happen to you. It happens to me, but still does.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah.
Question?
So you already mentioned one. Any other really good tips for breaking pileups?
Tips for breaking pileups.
Tips for breaking pileups. Well, one is that you have to kind of recognize, are you a fairly big signal or are you one of the weak signals?
Right.
You kind of rate yourself a little and you can figure that out pretty easily. If you are one of the, figure you're not a big gun, maybe you run 100 watts, you don't have a big directional antenna. The best thing to do, I think, is to go to the upper end edge of the range. And you can, after the station is standing by, scan quickly the range and you'll see the colors thin out. And he may say, listening, he's up 5 to 20. You might just try going up to 22 and get on that outer edge where the density of the colors is less.
All right, anybody else?
Well, Jonathan's got all the tips about contesting, and he's active in that. I used to be, but I gave it up some years ago.
Bob,
Tom?
antenna-wise, what is your favorite antenna for like, for what bands? I mean, 80, 40, 20?
Well, that's, it's different for those.
Right.
On the low bands, I like a vertical. A vertical, and I have two vertical, I have a vertical system for 80. It's called a Foursquare. Now that takes an acre of real estate, and I didn't have that for the first 30 years of my ham career, but I do now. It's 4 verticals, quarter wave verticals, spaced a quarter wave, with quarter wave wires going around the base of each one of them on the ground. I have the same system for 160, and that occupies 4 acres. Now, you gain a little with that because you can switch it and you can get 4 different directions typically, and there are ways to get a little more than that, but that's enough. Works really well. But a single vertical with an extensive ground system is very doable. And many people don't even have towers. I mean, if you've got a tall tree and you can put up, ideally you like a quarter wave vertical, but let's say quarter wave on 80 is 66 feet, let's say. But you've only got a tree that you can get a vertical wire 40 feet. So then you just go up and you bend it and you go out 20 feet and you've got a quarter wave, and it will behave very much like a vertical. Very ground dependent, so the more wires you put in the ground, and they can be any kind of wires. They can be insulated, they can be bare, they can be very small gauge, very heavy gauge. I just put whatever I can salvage in the ground, and the more the better. Broadcast standard is 120, but you don't need that many. You'll get diminishing returns. Above that, the most for your money is a 3-element beam, Yagi. It's the simplest thing, and most popular are multi-band ones now. Used to be 3 bands, but now with the work bands, a lot of them are 5. But a 3-element Yagi, anywhere from 35 to 65 feet, will get you most of the world.
Thank you.
More?
All right, any other questions?
Is there a particular gauge of wire that you would prefer as a ground band?
No. You know, what's more important than anything is that the wire doesn't get eaten up by the acidity or the condition of the soil. So obviously the larger gauge wire will last longer. I use 14 and 16, which I bought because I use such big quantities for the 40 and 80 meter. Those systems have been in for years, and I can't tell that's bare copper in the woods, but it's deteriorated. A smaller wire, and then I use some 20 gauge stuff with insulation, and you know that'll deteriorate in time, but hey, it'll last my lifetime.
I'm an electrician. I got free access to a bunch of it.
How's that?
I'm an electrician. I have a lot of access to large stuff.
That's good too. Yeah, I mean, it's a little harder. Mine just I lays on the surface, except where it went through a lawn, and then I cut a little trench and just pushed it under the soil. But
so you're not really
large gauge is fine.
You don't really just bury it. You just lay it out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Through the woods, just lay it out in a couple of years. You won't even know where it is. The leaves and branches and all that crap will fall.
George?
What is your factor? Do you have a favorite contact of all your contacts and stuff? Do you have a memorable contact that you made?
Most memorable contact. Most memorable.
Well, I think the most memorable one, it was mentioned in that video, was my contact with Mongolia on 160. I had worked all 39 zones on 160 by, I'm trying to think of the year, about 15 years earlier. But it's so hard on that low frequency, signals that pass through the auroral zone get great, low band signals get really attenuated. But in a course of years, that auroral zone shrinks and expands. And something happened in the winter of 2008 and 2009, and I've been on 160 since 1970, so I had a lot to compare it to. I would get an occasional Siberian station, on maybe 2 or 3 a year. They'd be very weak. Siberia zone 17, 18, and 19 lies above in that north and north quadrant. But in that year, for some reason or other, the auroral zone must have shrunken up, and I was hearing stations in Siberia. Almost, there was a morning path and there was an evening path, and I was hearing them 5 days a week on both paths. And there was only one station in Mongolia that had the right stuff. He had a kilowatt, he had a FT1000 receiver, and he had a full-size vertical antenna with a lot of radials. But he just wasn't exploiting this opening. I'd worked him many times on 80 meters and 40 and the other bands. But one morning, I heard him call CQ. And I answered, and I was pretty sure he came back. He wasn't loud. And so I repeated, and he came back very clearly with my report. I gave him one. We had a good exchange. A couple minutes later, on the internet, DX Summit, I thanked him for the contact, and he was watching, so he could see that and acknowledged. So I had an almost instant confirmation. My good friend in in Lynchburg, was there with a nice antenna similar to mine, heard that contact, lined up the call, and within 10 seconds, the guy was gone. So that's the only time I've ever heard Mongolia, and I had to wait 15 years, and I put up that 4 square with the idea to work him. So I spent a lot of money for that one contact, but it was worth it.
So, would you guys would you like to share anything about CVCC? So, Dr. Joe mentioned the programs that you guys were talking about doing earlier. Any shameless plug for your organization?
Sure.
There you go.
Would you like me to discuss contact activity?
If you would like to, come on up. Absolutely.
Good evening. Nice to be here. I see some familiar faces. Not very many, but some. You know, they asked me to talk about contesting, and since contesting and DXing kind of meld together as one, Bob has covered a great deal of ground, but I'm going to try to cover a little bit more that has a little bit more to do with contesting. I don't like the word contesting. It really isn't. It's radio sport. It's a sport that we get involved with, and it's a competition, no question about it, because you're trying to work as many countries and entities as you can in a given period of time. It's a lot of fun. And I think the biggest question I get when it comes to contesting is, what does it take? Oh, well, it takes a radio and an antenna and a little time. That's basically what you need. There's a lot of misunderstanding about HF to begin with. People say, well, gee, I don't have a big tower. Bob mentioned this before. I don't have a big tower. I don't have a lot of power. I've got a relatively small radio with a tuner. That's all you need. It's really all you need. A dipole up 50, 60 feet, 100 watts with a nice transceiver and a tuner, then you're on. And you can participate in contests. And during the weekend, it's not unusual to see even a minimal station work 75 to 100 countries. And it's a lot of fun. And it's very simple. It's a very short, quick QSO. You don't get a lot of good to hear you, hope the weather's good. Basically, at contest, you're exchanging a 5.9 and your state or the country, depending on the situation. But you don't really need, whether it's contesting or just general HF operation, you don't need a lot of expensive, big equipment. I've got several friends. George, sitting right here, KJ4IPF. We put up a dipole cut to 160 and then cut it down to about 80 by the time we got it up. And it's up about 40, 50 feet. And it's kind of spread out over a small lot, fed the ladder line. It's got a tube. Put a transceiver on it. And next thing you know, he's working DX with 100 watts. Now he's since added an amplifier and a different radio. But the point was, you worked 100 in some countries on 100 watts, something like that. Yeah. And lots of people that you may know, I don't know if you know Joe, K4JKB. Joe works DX and contesting with wires. And he lives in Woodlake. And he's got a lot about the size of a postage stamp. And he's got nothing but wire. He does have one vertical. But Joe, in last year's ARRL DX sideband contest, worked it for 11 hours over a 24-hour period and made 660,000 points. Well, about 450 contacts. Again, wires, nothing over 50 feet in the air. So contesting, like any DX or HF, you really don't have to have a big station. And how do you learn? What can you do to learn to contest? Well, the best thing to do is do what I did. I was invited in, when I first became a ham, into the Central Virginia Contest Club, and of which Bob was a charter member. And there was a lot of men in there and ladies who provided me with a great deal of knowledge. And I got invited out to Bob, before MYA's contest station, which was one of the top 10 contest stations in the country in those days. And they taught me contesting, and the rest is history. I sat next to people, watched them, listened, and they said, okay, it's your turn. What? Yeah, just do what I did. And that's what it's about. George came over out there, and then George started coming to my house to contest. The only thing you really have to have to be a good contester is the desire to do it. Now remember, DX and contesting kind of roll together, because as you work a contest, you've got the opportunity to work a whole lot more DX stations as time goes on. So it's kind of you don't have to be one to be the other, but you know, it kind of works neat. There's a plethora of rules involved with contesting, and there's a lot of things that you think, well, this is pretty daunting. Basically, basic etiquette is a rule for the day, and I think if you sit down in a station during a contest and listen, I think you get a really good idea, a good picture of how to do it. And there's even specific contesting logging software that's available. It's free on the internet, doesn't cost anything, and it really helps you with your contesting rate and keeping track of things accurately. And I guess the question I get also is, you know, why? Why do you contest? Well, it's a competition, it's a sport for me, but it also gives me access to the airwaves during a time when there's a lot of DX on, as Bob alluded to earlier. And I'll tell you, the big issue though is the camaraderie with your friends getting together to do it. And you meet people during a contest that you'll hear on the bands at different times out of the contest environment, and you'll go, hey, Juan, how are you? Geez, I worked in that contest last week. Next thing you know, you're buddies. You're exchanging emails, you know, you're talking about your family, pictures. It's just a lot of fun, and it's a great way to meet people all over the world, and you will make friends in every corner of the world. I think that the big reason that most of us don't try contesting is either there's a stigma because somebody said those contesters are a bunch of rotten, no good SOBs who take up a whole weekend of the band and I can't get on. There's some of that. But basically, contesting is just a good way to meet people. It's a good way to amass your DX totals. And I think that the biggest issue between DXing and contesting, the biggest questions we both get answered is, geez, don't you have to be a big, powerful station with lots of antennas and big power? Absolutely not. You don't have to. K4JKB and also George, W4MYA, premier contester, one of the top 10 in the world overall, doesn't have a tower. All wireless. No, well, just that one tower with a 3-element beam. But from 40 through 160, no tower, wires. Pieces of wire, coax fed into the shack, into the tunnel. 1,570,000 points in the ARRL EX contest last year. So the bottom line is you can get by with a very minimum of installation and cost. Central Virginia Contest Club, me included. George is a member there, Bob is a member, Joe is a member. One of our mission, in our mission statements, is that we try to work with new hands and hands that have some time in assisting in station design, station construction, antenna work. I will tonight tell you that I am opening my station up for anybody here in this room who would like to visit, whether it be during a contest environment or if you just want to come over one Saturday afternoon and sit down and see what's going on. I will open my station for that. I'd love to have you. The hospitality's not that great. Right. But this little lady here is the hostess with the mostest. So and Nancy is a ham also. Her call is K4VIV. And she passed her 13 words a minute code test to get her general back in the day. And I'm very proud of her. She's also a contester, very good contester. So bottom line is, we at CVCC would love to have you use us. You don't have to be a member. We're not soliciting you as a member. If you want to join, we'd be tickled, but that's not the reason we're here. The reason we're here is to stimulate HF usage and get you to the point where you're comfortable, familiar, and excited about it. Because I think that's where you really will get a big kick out of the hobby. Any questions?
Come on, guys. Questions, club, interest, sign up to visit? Nothing?
If you need my email address, it is on QR there. Don't hesitate to send me an email. Say, hey, I want to come over and see your station. We'll set something up. Glad to have you.
All right. Very good. Thank you. That's very good. Before we close the meeting, you had an announcement. Next weekend is?
Next week is a week long.
Talk loud. You gotta talk.
Sorry. Next week is the school club roundup. ARRL sponsors that twice a year, and we're going to be working it. So if anyone is on HF during the week, during the day, look for the kids, the schools, and all that. It's a good time. They work. It's 5 days next week.
What bands? What's the?
40, 80. I don't know about 160, and of course the 10, 15, and 20. But the 17 and 12 are excluded, and 60 and 30 are excluded.
Is there something online or something?
Yeah, ARRL has a web page dedicated to it that they keep updating. It's twice a year. It's called the School Club Roundup. You don't have to be in a club. I mean, you can work it as individuals or whatever, or just give points to the clubs.
You said your school, their schools?
We own the school, so we have a club.
School club.
All right. We start on, typically working 20 and 40, and then depending on propagation, what else we'll do. Okay.
All right, so final, any questions about CVCC, about our esteemed presenters? Nothing else? All right, well then I'd like to close and thank you all for showing up. Appreciate you taking an evening out and coming and talking.
We have to have a drawing and I'm going to have...
Did we actually have a 50-50?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so somebody put money somewhere. Blissfully unaware.
Next week you're picking, I can ask. Okay, the lucky winner is 744-943.
943, all right, George is the winner. All right, thank you all, let's, and we'll close out, thank you.